The night was as still as death, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the desolate land. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the wind whispered secrets through the dry grass, and the stars twinkled like they were mocking the struggles of those below. In this forgotten corner of the Arizona Territory, nestled between jagged cliffs and endless desert, stood the Granger Ranch. Elias Granger, the rancher who called this harsh land home, sat on his porch with a lantern by his side. His face was lined with worry, his hands calloused from years of hard work. The well, the lifeblood of his ranch, had gone dry weeks ago. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a tale far stranger than anything he could have imagined. The days had been long and grueling, each one bringing new despair. Elias's cattle grazed weakly on patches of sparse grass, their ribs visible beneath thinning hides. The river that once ran strong through the valley had slowed to a trickle, its banks cracked and barren. The crops in the fields had withered away, leaving nothing but dust and disappointment. And yet, despite all this, Elias refused to give up. He couldn't, not when everything he had ever known depended on him finding a way to survive. Each morning, he would rise before dawn, trudging out to the dried-up well with a bucket and rope, hoping against hope that water might miraculously return. But the hole remained empty, its depths dark and foreboding. By midday, the heat would become unbearable, forcing him back inside the small wooden house he shared with his family. His wife, Clara, tried her best to keep spirits high, but even her optimism began to wane as the drought dragged on. Their young son, Tommy, played quietly in the yard, his laughter growing fainter with each passing day. But it was not just the lack of water that weighed heavily on Elias's mind. Strange things had been happening around the ranch lately, things that defied explanation. Footprints appeared in the dirt overnight, leading nowhere. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision, vanishing when he turned to look. And then there was the pig. Old Bessie, as she was affectionately called, was no ordinary pig. She had been part of the family for years, roaming freely across the property and rooting around for food. Lately, however, she had grown restless, snorting and pacing near the old well. At first, Elias thought nothing of it. Animals often sense changes in the environment before humans did. But as the nights grew darker and colder, Bessie's behavior became more erratic. She would scream suddenly, loud and shrill, startling both man and beast alike. It started happening more frequently, always at midnight. The first time, Elias dismissed it as coincidence. The second time, he chalked it up to hunger or thirst. But by the third night, he realized something wasn't right. No animal screamed like that unless it was terrified or trying to warn someone. That particular night, Elias lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes you want to get up and do something, anything, to break the spell. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, he swung his legs over the side of the mattress and reached for his boots. Clara stirred beside him, but didn't wake. Quietly, so as not to disturb her, Elias slipped outside into the cool night. The ranch was bathed in moonlight, the silhouettes of trees and fences sharp against the pale glow. Everything seemed peaceful enough until Elias heard it, a blood-curdling scream coming from the direction of the well. Without hesitation, he grabbed his lantern and hurried toward the sound. When he arrived, he found old Bessie standing at the edge of the well, her bristles raised and her eyes wide with fear. Her squeals echoed to the stillness, reverberating off the surrounding rocks. Elias approached cautiously, holding the lantern high to illuminate the area. As he drew closer, he noticed something strange, a faint glimmer emanating from within the well. Curiosity got the better of him. Setting the lantern down, he knelt at the lip of the well and peered inside. At first, all he could see was darkness. But then, little by little, shapes began to emerge. They weren't rocks or debris. They were figures, human figures, suspended in what looked like liquid silver. Their faces were serene, almost peaceful, but their bodies floated unnaturally, as if caught in some otherworldly current. Elias stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. What sorcery was this? How could such a thing exist in the heart of his own land? Before he could process what he'd seen, the ground beneath him trembled violently. Dust kicked up around him, obscuring his vision. When the shaking subsided, Elias found himself staring at a gaping hole where the well used to be. From the depths of the chasm rose a figure cloaked in shadow, its presence commanding and unyielding. Its voice, deep and resonant, filled the night air. "You have disturbed the sacred waters," it intoned. "Now you must pay the price." For hours afterward, Elias recounted the events to Clara and Tommy, though neither believed him entirely. Who could blame them? The story sounded unbelievable even to him. Yet, deep down, Elias knew what he had witnessed was real. The next morning, he ventured back to the site of the well, lantern in hand, determined to uncover the truth. What he discovered there changed everything. Buried beneath layers of earth and stone was an ancient artifact, an ornate basin carved from black obsidian, etched with symbols that glowed faintly under the light of his lantern. Around it lay fragments of pottery and tools, remnants of a civilization long forgotten. Elias recognized them immediately from stories told by the local Native American tribes, tales of people who had lived harmoniously with nature until outsiders disrupted their balance. As he examined the artifacts, a realization dawned on him. The well hadn't gone dry because of drought. It had been sealed intentionally, hidden away to protect its secret. And now, with the barrier broken, the forces guarding the sacred waters had been unleashed. Days turned into weeks as Elias worked tirelessly to restore the balance. With help from the neighboring tribes, he learned the rituals required to appease the spirit that guarded the well. Sacrifices were made, prayers offered, and offerings left at the base of the obsidian basin. Slowly but surely, the land began to heal. Rain returned to the valley, filling streams and watering crops. The cattle grew strong again, their coats glossy and full. Even old Bessie calmed down, resuming her usual routine without so much as a peep after midnight. Yet, despite the restoration of normalcy, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, watching from the shadows. Sometimes, late at night, he swore he could hear whispers carried on the wind, voices speaking in languages older than time itself. And every once in a while, when the moon was full and the stars aligned just right, he would catch glimpses of the glowing figures in the distance, moving silently among the hills. In the end, Elias came to accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The ranch thrived once more, thanks to the sacrifices he had made, but the true nature of the sacred waters, and the beings that protected them, remained a secret buried deep within the earth, waiting patiently for the next curious soul to stumble upon it. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Elias worked tirelessly alongside the members of the neighboring tribes, their efforts blending seamlessly as they sought to mend the rift they had inadvertently created. The land responded in kind, its parched soil drinking the rains that now fell steadily, nourishing the earth and coaxing life back into the once barren fields. Crops sprouted with surprising vigor, their green shoots a stark contrast to the dull browns and grays that had dominated the landscape for so long. The river, too, began to swell, its waters rushing over rocks and through bends with a vitality that seemed almost defiant after months of stagnation. But beneath this newfound prosperity lurked an undercurrent of unease. Elias couldn't help but feel that the world around him was watching, waiting for the slightest misstep. He often found himself glancing over his shoulder, certain that someone or something was following him. At night, when the silence pressed down on the ranch like a heavy blanket, he would lie awake, listening intently for any sound out of place. The wind rustling through the trees no longer sounded natural. It carried whispers, soft and indistinct, yet unmistakably deliberate. Clara noticed a change in her husband. She approached him one evening as he sat on the porch, staring off into the distance. The lantern beside him cast flickering shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of worry etched deep into his features. "Elias," she said gently, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "You haven't been yourself since that night." Elias turned to look at her, his expression guarded. "It's nothing, Clara. Just tired." "Tired does explain the way you jump every time a bird flies by or how you check the perimeter twice before bed," she replied, her tone firm but laced with concern. "Something's bothering you, and I think you owe me an explanation." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. How could he put into words the weight that bore down on him? The feeling that no matter what they did, the balance they had restored was tenuous at best? That the spirits, or whatever they were, that guarded the well might not be satisfied so easily? Clara, he began slowly, choosing his words carefully, do you remember what the elders told us about the sacred waters? Her brow furrowed in thought. They said it was a gift from the earth itself, meant to sustain those who lived in harmony with it. Why do you ask? Because I don't think we've truly earned that gift, Elias admitted quietly. We disturbed something ancient, something beyond our understanding. And while the rituals may have appeased them for now, I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. Tested even. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she joined him on the porch, settling into a chair beside him. Together, they gazed out at the sprawling expanse of land that surrounded them, the moon casting a silvery glow over the rolling hills and dense patches of scrub brush. If what you say is true, she finally said, her voice steady despite the gravity of his words, then we must continue to honor the traditions that brought us this peace. We cannot afford to take anything for granted. Elias nodded, though the knot in his stomach remained unrelenting. Deep down, he knew Clara was right. Yet, there was another question gnawing at him, a question he hadn't dared to voice aloud until now. What if the price we paid wasn't enough? He murmured, more to himself than to her. What if the spirits demand more than just sacrifices and prayers? The weeks passed without incident, the ranch thriving under the renewed bounty of nature. But as autumn gave way to winter, Elias began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The winds grew colder, sharper, carrying with them a strange metallic tang that clung to the air like frost. Animals that had once roamed freely near the ranch now kept their distance, retreating deeper into the surrounding wilderness. Even old Bessie, who had returned to her usual antics after the initial disturbance, became increasingly skittish, her ears twitching at sounds only she could hear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias decided to investigate further. Armed with his lantern and a sense of foreboding, he ventured toward the site where the well had once stood. The obsidian basin still rested there, its surface polished smooth by centuries of use and reverence. Around it lay the remnants of the offerings they had left, dried herbs, small tokens carved from wood, and pieces of cloth dyed in vibrant colors. As he approached, a chill ran down his spine. The air felt heavier here, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. Kneeling beside the basin, he examined the symbols etched into its surface. They seemed to shimmer faintly, as though alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted. A low rumble emanated from deep within the earth, vibrating through his bones and reverberating in his chest. Startled, Elias scrambled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The light illuminated a crack forming in the soil, widening rapidly as if torn apart by some unseen force. From the fissure emerged a figure cloaked in shadow, its presence both familiar and terrifying. It was taller than any man, its form fluid and indistinct, shifting constantly like smoke caught in a draft. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin orbs of amber that pierced through the darkness and locked onto Elias with an intensity that froze him in place. You have done well, the figure intoned, its voice resonant and layered, each word echoing like thunder, but your debt remains unpaid. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. Debt? What debt? The balance is tipped once more, the figure continued, ignoring his question. For every drop of water given, a drop of blood must be offered in return. A cold sweat broke out across Elias's forehead. Blood? Was it asking for sacrifice? How much blood? Whose? Before he could press further, the figure raised a hand, and the crack in the ground began to close, sealing itself shut as quickly as it had opened. The shadows dissipated, leaving Elias alone in the dark save for the flicker of his lantern. Back at the ranch, Elias spent the rest of the night pacing the floor, his mind racing with possibilities. Sacrifice, blood, these were concepts he had never wanted to confront, let alone consider. Yet, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on him. If the spirits demanded payment, failure to comply could mean disaster. not just for his family, but for everyone who depended on the sacred waters. By morning, he had made up his mind. Summoning Clara and Tommy, he gathered them in the main room of the house, his expression grave. "There's something we need to discuss," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "And I want you both to listen carefully." Little did they know, the decision they faced would alter their lives forever and test the limits of their courage, faith, and love. Clara and Tommy exchanged uneasy glances as Elias spoke, his words carrying the weight of a truth they had long suspected but dared not confront. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire on the hearth, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. "Sacrifice," Elias began, choosing each word with deliberate care. "It's not something I ever want to consider. But if we're going to keep this land and our family safe, we need to understand what's truly at stake." Tommy, though young, sensed the gravity of the moment. His wide eyes darted between his parents, searching for reassurance. Clara, ever the pillar of strength, placed a hand on her son's shoulder, offering what comfort she could. "What do they want?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear hidden beneath it. Elias hesitated, the answer sitting heavy in his chest like a stone. "Blood," he finally admitted. "The spirits demand blood to restore the balance." A sharp intake of breath escaped Clara, while Tommy clutched at her arm. Confusion etched across his face. "Whose blood?" the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "That's the part one don't know yet," Elias replied honestly. "But I intend to find out before anything happens to either of you." Determined to uncover the full extent of the spirit's demands, Elias sought guidance from the elders of the neighboring tribe. They welcomed him warmly, their wisdom tempered by years of living in harmony with the land. Around a roaring campfire under a sky scattered with stars, Elias recounted the events leading up to this point, his voice raw with urgency. "The spirits have spoken." One elder, a man whose weathered face bore the marks of countless seasons, said gravely, "They seek retribution for the disturbance caused by your actions. Blood is indeed required, but not necessarily human." Relief flooded through Elias, though it was short-lived. If not human, then what kind of blood will suffice? The elder leaned forward, his gaze piercing through the flickering flames. Animal blood may satisfy their thirst, but only if offered willingly. A creature chosen by fate must give its life freely, without coercion or force. Elias frowned, the implications sinking in. Willingly? How can an animal offer itself willingly? "That, my friend, is the trial you must face," the elder answered cryptically. "Watch closely. Listen carefully. The earth will reveal the answer when the time is right." With no further explanation forthcoming, Elias returned to the ranch, his thoughts consumed by the enigmatic words of the elder. Willingly? What did that mean? And how would he recognize such a sign? Days turned into nights as Elias kept vigil, his senses attuned to every sound and movement around the ranch. He spent hours observing the animals, hoping to catch some indication of which among them might be fated to make the ultimate sacrifice. Old Bessie remained restless, her behavior growing stranger with each passing day. She would wander far from the barn, stopping abruptly to stare at nothing in particular, her ears twitching as though listening to voices only she could hear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of gold and crimson, Elias followed Bessie as she made her way toward the site of the old well. To his surprise, she didn't stop there. Instead, she continued onward, her steps deliberate and unshakable, until she reached a grove of ancient mesquite trees that stood sentinel at the edge of the property. Under the shade of these towering giants, Bessie paused, lowering her snout to ground. Her squeals were soft now, almost mournful, as though bidding farewell to something or someone. Intrigued, Elias approached cautiously, his lantern held high to illuminate the area. There, nestled beneath the roots of one particularly massive tree, was a small spring, its waters shimmering faintly in the fading light. The sight struck Elias with awe. He had never noticed the spring before, yet here it was, hidden in plain sight all along. As he watched, Bessie turned to face him, her eyes filled with an intelligence that defied her nature. Then, without warning, she lowered herself on the ground, her body trembling as if overcome by some unseen force. Before Elias could react, a single tear rolled down her snout, falling into spring with a soft splash. In that instant, the water erupted into motion, swirling violently as if stirred by an invisible hand. From the depths emerged a figure cloaked in ripples, its form indistinct but unmistakably powerful. It regarded Elias with eyes that glowed like molten gold, their intensity leaving him speechless. "You have found the willing soul," the figure intoned, its voice resonant and layered. "Old Bessie has chosen to offer her life, securing the balance once more." Elias stared in disbelief, his heart wrenching at the thought of losing the loyal companion who had been part of their family for so many years. "Is there no other way?" he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "There is none," the figure replied firmly. "Her sacrifice ensures the survival of your land and those who depend on it." Before Elias could protest further, the spring surged upward, enveloping Bessie in a cascade of liquid silver. Her cries echoed briefly before fading into silence, replaced by a serene glow that bathed the grove in warmth. When the waters settled, Bessie was gone, her essence absorbed into the earth as a final gift to the spirits. Back at the ranch, Elias struggled to explain the events to Clara and Tommy. Tears streamed down their faces as they mourned the loss of their beloved pig. But deep down, they understood the necessity of her sacrifice. In the days that followed, the ranch flourished as never before. Crops grew tall and lush, cattle thrived, and the river swelled overflowing, its waters crystal clear and abundant. Yet, even amidst this prosperity, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits still watched, waiting patiently for the next chapter in their intricate dance with humanity. For now, though, peace reigned over the Granger Ranch, a fragile peace, perhaps, but one built on trust, respect, and the unyielding bond between man and nature. And so, the story of the rancher and his well became legend, whispered among the winds and carried through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest sacrifices are made not by choice, but by destiny. The days that follow were a blur of gratitude and reflection. The ranch, once parched and desolate, now brimmed with life. Crops flourished under the sun's golden rays, their vibrant greens a stark contrast to the dull browns that had dominated the land for so long. The river sang as it flowed through the valley, its waters crystal clear and teeming with fish. Even the air seemed fresher, carrying with the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming wildflowers. But beneath the surface of renewal, Elias Granger carried a weight he could not shake. Every night, as he lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into slumber, he found himself returning to the grove where old Bessie had made her sacrifice. The spring still bubbled gently beneath the mesquite trees, its waters shimmering faintly in the moonlight. It was a place of quiet reverence, a reminder of what had been given, and what might yet be demanded. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias decided to visit the grove once more. He took with him a small bundle of herbs, dried and bundled tightly by the tribal elders, meant as an offering of thanks. The path to the grove was familiar now, each step etched into his memory like the grooves on a well-worn boot. As he approached, the wind stirred softly around him, carrying whispers that seemed almost deliberate in their rhythm. When he arrived, the spring greeted him with its usual serenity, its waters undisturbed and glowing faintly under the light of the crescent moon. Elias knelt beside it, placing the herbs carefully at its edge. For a moment, he simply sat there, lost in thought, his mind drifting back to the events that had led him here. "Did I do right?" he murmured aloud, though he wasn't certain who or if anyone would hear. The answer came not in words, but in sensation. A gentle warmth spread through the air, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. The water rippled slightly, though no breeze touched its surface, and Elias felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. It was as if the spirits acknowledged his question, offering reassurance without judgment. Yet, as the warmth faded and the grove returned to stillness, Elias couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end, or merely another beginning? Weeks passed, and the ranch continued to thrive. Clara and Tommy adapted to new abundance, their smiles brighter than they had been in years. They spoke little of old Bessie, choosing instead to honor her memory through the care they gave to the land she had helped save. Yet, despite the joy that filled their home, Elias remained vigilant, his instincts honed by the lessons he had learned. It was during one of these moments of watchfulness that something unusual caught his eye. While tending to the cattle one afternoon, he noticed a peculiar pattern forming in the clouds above. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, a trick of the light playing across the vast expanse of blue. But as the hours passed, the pattern grew clearer, taking on the shape of symbols eerily similar to those etched into the obsidian basin. Intrigued and unsettled, Elias mounted his horse and rode toward the horizon, following the shifting shapes until they led him to an unfamiliar stretch of land beyond the ranch's borders. Here, the terrain was different, rockier, with jagged cliffs rising sharply against the sky. Among the rocks, half buried in the dirt, lay another artifact, a stone tablet, its surface carved with intricate designs that pulsed faintly with inner light. Elias dismounted, his heart pounding as he approached the discovery. The tablet was cold to the touch, yet it radiated a presence that made his skin prickle. Symbols swirled before his eyes, their meanings just out of reach, teasing him with possibilities he dared not imagine. Before he could decipher more, a low rumble echoed through the valley, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Startled, Elias looked up to see shadows moving across the cliffs, their forms indistinct but unmistakably alive. Whatever forces guarded the sacred waters, they were closer than ever, and they seemed to be watching him. That night, Elias returned to the ranch, his mind racing with questions. He shared his findings with Clara, whose initial reaction was one of alarm. "You think it means we're being tested again?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but whatever it is, we need to prepare." Together, they sought counsel from the tribal elders, who listened intently to Elias's account. When he finished, one elder nodded slowly, his expression grave. "This is a sign," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The spirits are expanding their domain, seeking to restore balance not just to your land, but to all surrounding areas. You must decide whether to accept this responsibility or risk losing everything you've gained." Elias absorbed the elder's words, his chest tightening with the enormity of the decision. Accepting such a role would mean dedicating their lives to maintaining harmony between man and nature, a task far greater than anything they had faced before. Refusing, however, could invite consequences neither he nor his family could bear. As the stars twinkled above the ranch, casting their light over the peaceful fields and grazing cattle, Elias stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness. He thought of old Bessie, whose sacrifice had saved them once. He thought of the grove, the spring, and the symbols that seemed to whisper secrets only partially understood. And he thought of the future, uncertain, daunting, but full of potential. Clara joined him, draping a blanket around his shoulders. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we'll face it together." Elias smiled, drawing strength from her presence. "We always have." And so, with determination in their hearts and hope guiding their steps, the Granger prepared to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the bond they shared with each other, with the land, and with the mysterious forces that governed it, was their greatest weapon against the unknown. For now, though, the ranch rested peacefully under the watchful gaze of the stars, its story still unfolding chapter by chapter in the vast and untamed wilderness of the Wild West.